Hey y'all. So let's go ahead and get into the breakdown of Ephesians chapter 5. Y'all cannot believe we got one more chapter and it's over. So the chapter context. Chapter 5 contains a very practical second half of the book of Ephesians. Chapter 4 encouraged Christians not to live as unbelievers do, but worthy of the gift that we have been given. Chapter 5 gives even more direct application of these principles. Paul details impure attitudes and habits which Christians ought to put aside. He then details the proper approach to marriage rooted in a Christian understanding of the gospel. This style of advice will continue through chapter 6. Paul's advice will culminate in a famous analogy about applying Christian principles to all life using the symbolism of a suit of armor. Now that's going to be good. Okay, so let's get into chapter 5 breakdown part 1. So chapter 5 covers two important themes: obedience to the example of Christ and the relationship between husbands and wives. First, Paul discusses how believers are to be imitators of God through a focus on the love demonstrated by Christ. Ephesians 5:1-21. Second, wives and husbands are given clear biblical teachings regarding mutual love and submission in relationship to Christ. Ephesians 5:22-33. The first section, Ephesians 5:1-21, encourages believers to imitate God like loving children. Ephesians 5:1. Sexual impurity is not to be known among believers. Ephesians 5:3. The same is true of foolish talk. Ephesians 5:4. Non-believers are marked by a persistent pattern of these behaviors. Ephesians 5:5. Believers are not to be deceived by lies. Ephesians 5:6. I just know I heard something. And must not be partners with those who deceive. Ephesians 5:7. Yes, believers once lived in this way, but are no longer walking in darkness. Ephesians 5:8. Believers are to find out what pleases God. Come on, Paul. Ephesians 5:10. Believers should take no part in sin, but rather expose sin. Ephesians 5:11. This does not require us to be vulgar or offensive in discussing sinful acts. Ephesians 5:12. Period. Paul then quotes from what was likely part of an early Christian song in verse 14. He encourages believers to walk with wisdom. Ephesians 5:15. Believers are to make most of their time because the days are evil. Ephesians 5:16. Paul encourages readers to understand the will of God. Ephesians 5:17. And not become drunk on wine. Ephesians 5:18. Instead, believers are to be filled with the Spirit, praising the Lord and giving thanks to Him. Ephesians 5:18-20. Believers should also submit to one another out of respect for Christ. Period. Ephesians 5:21. The second part of this chapter, Ephesians 5:22-33, addresses mutual submission between husband and wife. Ephesians 5:22-24 focuses on wives first. They are called to submit to their husbands as the Lord. Ephesians 5:22, with Paul using the analogy of Christ and the church as an example. Ephesians 5:23-24. Husbands are then addressed and called to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Period. Ephesians 5:25. They are to love their wives as they do their own bodies, teaching that the man who loves his wife loves himself. Ephesians 5:28. Paul transitions to a reference to Genesis 2:24, noting the mystery is profound between Christ and the church. Ephesians 5:32. In summary, Paul reminds husbands to love their wives as they do themselves, and for the wives to respect their husbands. Period. Ephesians 5:33-22. Whoa. Ephesians 5:33. That's it. Okay, so let's get into the breakdown part 2. So chapter 5, a commentary, focuses on two main themes: living as children of light by rejecting darkness and immorality, and the relationship between husbands and wives as a reflection reflection of Christ's love for the church. This passage encourages Christians to be wise, joyful, spirit-fed, spirit-filled, to live a life worthy of their calling, and to model sacrificial love and mutual respect in marriage and other relationships. Key verses include the call to walk as children in light and the instructions for husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church, and for wives to respect their husbands. Okay, so let's get into more of a little breakdown. So theme 1, walk as children of light, rejecting darkness. The chapter contrasts the unfruitful works of darkness with the light of the Lord. It encourages believers to avoid immorality, impurity, greed, filthiness, and coarse jesting. 5:3-5. So Ephesians chapter 5, verses 3-5. Imitating God. Believers are called to be imitators of God by living in love, similar to how Christ loved and gave himself up for them. Ephesians 5:1-2. Arise and awake. The commentary uses the phrase awake you who sleep to call Christians to a new spiritual awareness, since they have been made alive together with Christ. 5 verse 14. Be filled with the Spirit. Instead of being controlled by wine, Paul says to be filled with the Spirit, which means being controlled by the Holy Spirit in all aspects of life, including worship, thanksgiving, and submission. Ephesians chapter 5, 18-21. So theme number 2, mutual submission in love and marriage. Submitting to one another. The chapter begins with the principle of mutual submission out of reference for Christ. 5:21. Wives, submit to husbands. This is presented within a larger context of the family and is likened to the church's submission to Christ. It is an act of respect for God's order, not a form of superiority. You heard it, right? And is motivated by and grounded in submission to Christ. Husbands, love your wives. Husbands are commanded to love their wives sacrificially and to the point of death, just as Christ loved the church. Ephesians 5:25. This means providing for their needs, serving them, and cherishing them. Husbands, provide for their needs, serving them, and cherishing them. But that also comes from a wife who is submitted and respectful. And both of y'all got to be submitted to God. But I'm not married, so who am I to tell y'all anything? I'm just reading what the word says, okay? Marriage as a reflection of Christ in the church. The ultimate model for this relationship is the union of Christ and the church. Christ's love, sacrifice, and relationship with the church is the standard by which husbands and wives are modeled, which are to model in their own relationships. Period. Okay, y'all, so that is all I have for the full breakdown of Ephesians chapter 5. Tomorrow will be chapter 6. And that will conclude the full book of Ephesians, but tomorrow's going to be a good one. I've been waiting on this one. I've been waiting on 6. But yeah, y'all, I will see you guys later. Bye.